There is a popular saying that everyone, no matter who they are, no matter where they come from, no matter what they do, are deserving of love. Now, it's a powerful statement that highlights the inherent value of every human being, regardless of their background or actions. And I feel like when Kubo had heard this, he had taken it personally, because during the 1000-Year Blood War arc, he takes it upon himself to create what I believe is to be the vilest, most repulsive and unlovable character that the Bleach world has ever seen. Kubo, as an absolute master of his craft, unsurprisingly succeeds in creating a character that is universally despised. I'm of course talking about Pepe Waccabrada, a character who I'm sure is loved by many in the Bleach world, but definitely not of their own free will. He's a member of the Quincy army, the Sternritter, who invade the Soul Society, and although he initially remains in the background, he becomes more prominent during the second Quincy invasion, and he in fact possesses one of the most interesting shrifts among the Sternritter. His power is among one of the many shrift abilities that could have single-handedly won the war if all of the conditions had remained convenient for it. In general, Pepe's character and his ability are so reviled by fans that he's become somewhat of a running joke within the Bleach community. Despite this, his shrift and the way that it is used within the story is worth analyzing and dissecting in order to understand the full implications of his ability. In this video, I intend to fully examine Pepe's ability, the Love. I will go over every way that it is utilized in the story, as well as speculating how this shrift works. Before the video begins, only 12% of the people who watch my content are subscribed to the channel. If you enjoy these videos, then subscribe and stick around for more content just like this. Now let's get back to the topic of the video. Pepe's ability, the Love, makes its debut fairly early on in the 1000-Year Blood War arc, as it's revealed within chapter 500. While the Shinigami were still reeling from the shock of the onset of the invasion, the Research and Development Institute was trying its best to make sense of the situation and offer some support where it was necessary. Now, this venture would be immediately disrupted as a giant fist would come crushing through the floor. Now, you'd assume that this was an enemy Quincy who had just invaded their lab, but to their surprise and horror, they see the face of none other than the gatekeeper of the Serite, Jidambo. They immediately ask what on earth he is doing, but their questions are answered by a barrage of fists, pulverizing a great number of them and the Research and Development Institute. Now, this is where we see a distant shot of Pepe laughing while this happens, a clear indication that he had a hand in this bizarre event. Also, if I had $1 for every time a villain had taken over the mind of a giant in the Soul Society, I'd have 2. I just find it pretty funny that this has happened twice. All in all, there's not much that we can take away from this initial display of the Love at work. We don't get to see how it's activated or the rules that it operates by, since this was a brief showcase of the ability after the fact. It's interesting to compare the initial use of the Love to how it appears later on in the story, because things are quite different. It leads one to wonder if Kubo hadn't yet decided on how this power would function, or if he had purposefully made it mysterious in order to withhold its true potential. Now, Jidambo State, after being affected by the Love, looked more like he was a victim of Sternritter Z the zombie, rather than what the Love would come to look like later on in the 1000-Year Blood War arc. He had appeared to be dazed and unconscious, as though not fully awake, and he had attacked and killed his fellow Shinigami. Now, this brief display of Pepe's power was the only one that was seen at this point in the story. However, as the functions of the Love are later revealed, it becomes evident that there is much more to this ability than initially meets the eye. Although the exact mechanics and requirements of how the Love works are difficult to determine, they undoubtedly do exist. We'll discuss this further as we dive into other instances that the Love ability is showcased in the story. The next instance of the Love appearing is in chapter 586, or at the very least that's when I estimate it to have been used. Byakuya, Rukia, Renji, and several other lieutenants had intercepted Pepe and 7 other Sternritter who were trying to prevent Ichigo from reaching Yhwach, which leads to a fight breaking out between them. Unfortunately, the events of this fight are all off-screened, but we do see the aftermath of it in chapter 594. It seems as though Byakuya has defeated Candice, Nanana, and Robert with almost no effort to boot, as he appears relatively unharmed after fighting 3 very strong opponents. A wounded Menina Maninas and Lil Toto observe him and talk about just how absurdly strong Byakuya has become, even stating how he seems nothing like the guy who got absolutely destroyed by Asnod. Lil Toto then begins to wonder where Pepe has gone and states that his power would have really come in handy at a time like this. While Byakuya was surveying the area for enemies, he was approached by Hisagi, who reports that he has defeated a Sternritter. It's amusing how Hisagi noticed that Byakuya had already defeated 3 within the same time frame. Now this moment highlights the vast difference in power between a captain and a lieutenant. However, before we can fully appreciate this moment, Byakuya immediately knocks away Hisagi's Zanpakuto, and Kubo draws this panel very skillfully, capturing the shock and confusion on Hisagi's face, and his intentional placement of his artwork in order to make it appear as though Byakuya is the attacker. Now this effectively conveys the confusion surrounding the situation, and it builds up the mystery of it. A confused Hisagi asks Byakuya what's happening, and he even asks if he's alright, but Byakuya responds by stating that it is Hisagi who should be asked that question. While this conversation ensues, their Zanpakuto continue to clash, with Byakuya narrowly dodging a really close swing as he begins to wonder if he was facing an imposter or if Hisagi has fallen under the control of the enemy. In response to these questions, Hisagi remains rather confused as Byakuya asks why he's attacking him. He states that there was no way that he's fallen under the enemy's control. After all, he was doing it all for Lord Pepe. Now this changes into an all-out attack as Hisagi goes into full swing with his attacks. The fight cuts away to Maninas and Lil Toto, who are watching nearby. They immediately recognize this bizarre behavior to be the result of Pepe's presence and realize that he's nearby too. The battle then switches to Pepe, who reveals himself and begins to explain that his power makes all who are touched by it love him unconditionally. He does use some very interesting phrasing that seems to hint at exactly what his ability does, as he explains that his love splits the mind in 2, and the 2 severed halves are rejoined together as one for him. It almost sounds as though he's explaining that his power splits the minds of those it affects and completely rewires it to make them purely subservient to him. It is after his extremely overplayed speech that we finally get to see just how the love is transmitted. In order to use it, he first draws a heart shape with his 2 hands and he gathers reishi within that space, and he then fires off the heart-shaped projectile by thrusting out his arms in that specific shape at his target, and once this heart-shaped projectile makes contact, the love begins to take effect. Interestingly enough, Pepe doesn't aim at Byakuya, but rather at the onlooking Maninas and Lil Toto. Lil Toto narrowly moves out of the way, but by doing so has created the perfect opening for the love's projectile to hit Maninas. It ends up forming a heart-shaped print on her face. Maninas immediately begins to swoon at Pepe and calls him her master, and her arm grows massive as she activates her own Schrift, the power, and she punches Lil Toto square in the face. Now this entertains the sadistic Pepe, who explains that if he's able to kill off the other Sternritter, all the glory will be his. The battle between Byakuya and Hisagi continues in chapter 595, as Byakuya continues to masterfully weave out of the way of Hisagi's attacks. Now this is where I had started to understand exactly how the love works. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned that it seems slightly weird how Jidambo seemed almost like a zombie in how he had moved and fought when under its control, but it seems like this is a very consistent phenomenon. It's interesting to note that both Hisagi and Maninas had exhibited a similar silent and zombie-like state after being affected by the power of the love, despite appearing to be more present initially. This suggests that the state that Jidambo had fallen into was a natural outcome of the love's power. The victims first show a manic state where they declare their love for Pepe before devolving into a more silent state where they fight for him while in a daze. Additionally, Maninas is able to use her Schrift, the power, whilst under the influence of the love, indicating that victims are not restricted from using their full power while under its control. But what is unclear is if the affected victims are able to fight at the same skill level as before. Returning to the fight between Hisagi and Byakuya, Pepe was rambling on about how the power of his Schrift works, while Byakuya had taken the opportunity to incapacitate Hisagi. During this time, Byakuya observed that the love's power would likely stop if the victim was immobilized. This was confirmed by Hisagi's inability to move after being knocked out. Byakuya concludes that killing Pepe would end the power of his love, a statement that Pepe himself verifies as he commends Byakuya's ability to analyze and understand his power in order to come to that conclusion. After they briefly clash, we see Pepe's love projectiles used in an all-new way. He shoots them towards Byakuya, who dodges them, but one of them imprints themselves onto a building behind him. Pepe then manipulates this projectile to extend far past its point of impact, and he makes it chase after Byakuya, who is still able to effortlessly avoid it. Now, after noticing that the building exhibited no supernatural features, Byakuya is able to deduce that the love doesn't work on buildings, which is due to the fact that buildings don't have souls. Now, this statement in itself is an interesting one because previously in the story it was established that everything has a soul. Now, this statement was made in chapter 432 during the Fullbring arc, where Ginjo had explained that literally every object has a soul, but Ginjo did elaborate by saying that the soul within inanimate objects was quite small, so it's possible that it was far too small to be influenced by the love, or maybe that Byakuya just failed to consider this fact. Also, Ginjo's example may be in reference to how we imprint ourselves onto inanimate objects that are sentimental to us, like how Ichigo's soul is imprinted onto his substitute Shinigami badge. So what follows this scene supports the idea that it was an oversight on Byakuya's part, since he slashes away the next love projectile with his Zanpakuto as he realizes his mistake a second too late, as his Zanpakuto now turns against him. He flings it away as Pepe explains that he can even steal the hearts of Zanpakuto with his power. Byakuya was unaware that Hisagi had gotten back up and picked up his Zanpakuto that he threw away. He then proceeds to attack Byakuya with Senbon and Kazeshini. The skillful captain is able to block all attacks with his bare hands. While distracted by Hisagi, Byakuya fails to see an incoming love projectile, which hits him in the back. Now, surprisingly, it has no effect, and this ends up being explained by Kubo in his official fan club outside. The reason that it didn't work was because of the Oken clothing that Byakuya was wearing. This supports the impressive defensive capabilities of the Oken clothing. Frustrated by how ineffective his love power was, he goes into his holy form and Pepe creates what he calls the love rope. This can be described as a long chain of his heart-shaped constructs, and he stabs Byakuya through the back with it and orders Hisagi to halt his attack, and that he was going to make Byakuya love him no matter what. And yes, I'm just as uncomfortable as you are here, but somehow it gets worse. In what would be his final gross use of his equally gross power, he pulls out a bow and arrow from his mouth, because why not? He then prepares to fire his arrow, but thankfully his face gets kicked in from Kensei. This is one time in the story where I was genuinely happy I didn't get to see a character's ultimate technique, because I just needed him off the screen, but I'd assumed that his arrow is most likely a condensed version of his original love projection, which is able to steal anyone's heart without exception. Now, after this attack gets disrupted, we don't really see much of Pepe again, outside of a statement that he makes about his love being stronger than Giselle's zombie shrift, and how his ability to love doesn't work on Mayuri zombies. When everything's said and done, the love is a power that could have wreaked great havoc during the 1000-year Blood War arc, but that is if Pepe had the common sense to remain hidden. It has none of the weaknesses of Giselle's zombie shrift, and it's outright stated to be more powerful than it, but Pepe somehow manages to achieve far less than Giselle. In conclusion, the love was a rather powerful shrift that gladly never reached its full potential, all because once again the goat Mayuri had created an answer for its terrifying power. But I'll talk more about that when I get around to doing my own standalone Pepe character analysis video. So what did all of you think about Pepe's ability to love? Do you think that it's better than Giselle's shrift? And like me, were you glad that we didn't get to see its full potential? This was a very interesting and at sometimes disturbing video to make, so I'd love to know all of your thoughts about it in the comments. Lastly, thank you for making it to the end of this video, and I can't wait to see you in my next Bleach Explained video. If you enjoy my content, then you can support my channel through Patreon for as little as $1 a month, or even through YouTube by becoming a channel member. You will gain access to exclusive channel perks and a Discord server which I frequently use. So become a member of my Zero Division and be the first to know about my upcoming videos. And once again, thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.